Ryan, welcome to the Nifty Travel Podcast.
Thank you very much for having me, Alex.
Oh, you're welcome. And well, today we are transmitting across continents, so it's the magic of the internet is working for us today.
Absolutely.
So the first thing I always like to ask my guests is about your earliest memories of travel.
Well, I grew up kind of in and around Toronto, Canada, and I think my kind of earliest memories of travel might be, I don't know, typical kind of North American things to do, like go to Disneyland. I think I did that when I was pretty young. I was very lucky. I was able to do some ski trips when I was also very young, like around 5. My dad got me skiing really young, so this whole idea of like, packing, getting on an airplane, going to some other part of Canada or maybe even the US and playing around in the mountains for a week. It definitely sparked an interest in me wanting to see more.
Yeah, well, that was going to be my next question, really. So it gave you a clue of what you might be interested in the future.
Yeah, but then like sports take your life over, right? So you have all these kind of early experiences when you're 5, 6, 7, 8, and then by the time you're 8, if you're an athlete or something like that, like your whole life just gets consumed for like 10 or 15 years, which is what happened to me. So I think I was like 6 or 7 when I started playing basketball, and that really just took over my life until I was 22, and I basically like stopped going on ski trips. I stopped traveling with my family because I was playing during the holidays all the time, and then it wasn't until my basketball career was over, when I was 22, when I wasn't able to go on and play professionally after college, that I was like, hey, like maybe I should travel again. Maybe I should see something, because that really, I have some fond memory of that somehow in my deep subconscious, and that's what I should do then, now that I kind of like reclaimed my life back from sports.
So what attracted you to basketball then? Was it one of many sports that eventually took your interest, or was it always going to be basketball?
Well, I think my dad was an Olympian, so he was in the 1972 Munich Olympics, and he was a water polo player. So from a young age, my dad was trying to get me into swimming and water polo, and I did those. I played those two sports and really loved them, but I don't know, it was just a bit rough. Water polo is a very rough sport, and basketball is a rough sport too. I don't know. I played rugby as well. I loved rugby, but the swimming and the water polo didn't really stick, and then I wasn't a very good skater, which is a terrible thing for a Canadian to admit. And sadly, my hockey career was stopped before it even started. So I just picked up a basketball one day and I loved it. And this was before Toronto had a NBA franchise. This was at a time when there was maybe one Canadian. I don't even think there were any Canadians in the NBA at that stage. So but yeah, just love the sport, and it kind of grew with me, and now it's hugely popular in Canada, and we've got a lot of players, moving from Canada into the NBA and stuff like that. So it's been an interesting journey to see what it was like, 30 years ago or even more when I started.
So how did sport then change you, do you think?
I think playing sports is amazing for anyone, because playing sports is wonderful because I think it really makes you a very disciplined person. It makes you understand work ethic, and I think playing team sports is really wonderful because then you really get to understand how to work with a team, how to gel with a team, how to take a group of people and achieve something together. how to manage different personalities, how to motivate people with different personalities, how to criticize people with different personalities. There's 15 players on a basketball team, and you have to talk to each one of them differently. You can't just use the same tone and the same language across everyone, because not everyone responds the same way to the same types of positive feedback or criticism. So it really taught me like how to really manage um, expectations and also manage my communication.
Yeah. Well, I think sport is a great teacher, isn't it? Um, it certainly took me out of my shell. So, but
And
very
which
much.
which which sport did you play?
I played. I ended up playing tennis. Um, Very much a one-on-one sport, but I started in team sports and kind of transitioned. I think if my fellow school students hadn't constantly stole my kit, I probably would have stayed in a team sport. So it's the bizarre things that can sometimes change your direction completely.
Well, tennis, I have to applaud you, because I think tennis is just brutal, because it's just you and you alone. And if you're not getting it done, there's only one person's fault, and you're looking at yourself in the mirror. And I think that is just a psychological challenge to get through competitive tennis.
I think I was probably attracted by strategy. That was kind of what I liked about it, and the
Mm,
physicality, of course.
mm.
Um, a big thrill. So, would you say that at the end of your basketball playing, then you became a more resilient individual, and that was going to help you later?
Yeah, I think everything I've done in my life, since then comes from that training and that discipline that I had in basketball. And, whether you take that into the business world or whether you take it into adventure travel like I did, whether it's very easy to go from a 3-hour basketball practice that is grueling and painful and kind of miserable to climbing up the side of a mountain for 8 or 10 hours, which is also grueling and tiring and miserable. So there can be a lot of crossovers and similarities to that kind of training, and then carrying it over into the adventure space for sure. So I don't know. I just found it. I love doing physical things. I love being physically challenged. I love getting out and using my body to explore and understand the world. And I think a lot of that comes from the physicality that I grew up with, just playing sports and basketball specifically.
Yeah. So, as you said, you reached the age of 22, and you realised that maybe basketball wasn't going to be your entire life, but you were saying that you had this uh, inner feeling that maybe travel was kind of the next move. So there you were at 22, and you got offered. Well, tell me how you got into journalism and why that led you to go to China.
Yeah, so I think when you spend 14, 16 years just doing one thing, one thing, one thing all the time, which for me was playing basketball, and my education was kind of connected to my basketball. So if I didn't do well in school, I couldn't play basketball. So, I made all my classes, made all my grades, played my games. And then it's really hard, because if you're not good enough to play for your national team, or you're not good enough to play for your professional team, which is a position 95% of all athletes find themselves in. I was just one of the many that you kind of have to recalibrate your life um, around not playing sports anymore. And for me, that was like super difficult. And I definitely went through some depression, and I went through some real anxiety, and just didn't know how to identify myself anymore, because I feel like, your whole identity is wrapped up in that sporting pursuit. And then all of a sudden there's no more goals. You're not training 3 hours a day. You're not in the weight room. You're not in the physio room. You've lost all your best friends, basically. I mean, you still stay in touch, but it's not the same. So I was just like, I got to get out of here. Like, I got to get out of Toronto, um, and see something different and feel something different. So I just felt like going to China would be a really interesting opportunity, because I felt like it was as far away from Canada as I could get culturally, and just felt like that would be a really interesting place to. I didn't necessarily think I was going to live there the first time I went, but I felt like if I could take 3 or 5 months of just traveling around in China by myself, I'd probably find my next direction. And I really wanted to like give myself that time to figure it out. And I think, a lot of times people just don't give themselves time and space to think. And, people are trying to make real life decisions in real time while they're really busy and they're distracted, and they don't give themselves that space. And for me, finding that space and finding that time has always kind of led me to, a deeper sense of reflection and a deeper idea of maybe what my next plan should be. And I've gone back to that time and time again since I was 22.
So it sounds like you entered China without an agenda. You
No
were
agenda. I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't have any Chinese friends. I didn't speak Mandarin. I didn't know anything. So I just kind of showed up. And I think I had like $2,000 in my bank account. So, I didn't even know how long that was going to last. Parents thought I'd probably be home within the month. Um, but I got there, I met some people. I was like, how do you make a living here? How do you work? What do you do? And ended up getting a job teaching English. So that kind of stabilized my income. And then I was just amazed by Shanghai, really. So I just started taking pictures and writing everything I saw, and then I was like, oh my god, like I love writing and telling stories, and China was completely the muse or the engine behind finding that out. Because again, when you play basketball for 16 years at a competitive level, there's no time or space for any other hobbies, like writing, like photography, like anything. Like your life is just basketball, and you grow up very. I don't think you grow up like a very well balanced person. You don't grow up with a lot of diverse interests, right? You just play basketball. But then when I went to China, it really opened my eyes to just the diversity of the world, the way people live, and I just felt like I was going to university again. Like I just felt like I was learning so much every day, and I just wanted to document it and tell stories about what I was seeing in China. And this was in 2001 and 2002, and it was inspiring. So I just decided like I just going to tell stories, and then I figured out how to work for some local magazines in Shanghai and Beijing. They have these English language magazines for the expat population that lives there. And then I started working in Hong Kong and Singapore for some regional magazines and newspapers. And then I started working for airline magazines. And then eventually I got in with Time, New York Times, Time, Newsweek, Forbes, Fortune, and all the rest. And that was kind of how it came. Like I got a job teaching English so that I could make a living. And then I started just trying to branch out and tell stories. And I was writing about travel, adventure, and going to remote parts of China, taking pictures, living with local families, and really just loving those experiences. And then from that moment, I was completely hooked.
so. What would you say? Did you have like a preconceived idea of what you would find in China, or did you feel like I'm a blank canvas? I don't mind what I find.
Well, I did take a class in my second year of university called Introduction to Modern China, and so I did have some idea of what I was walking into. I'd taken some classes on Asian history, Asian politics, Chinese history, Chinese politics. But anything you learn in university is like 10 years old, right? Because the professors aren't going to China twice a year and really dipping their toes in and understanding what's going on. So, the China I walked into was much more fast paced, much more modern, much more wild and crazy than I could have ever imagined. And this was my first trip into China was September 2001, just after the 9/11 attacks in New York. And I got on a plane, I think like less than 2 weeks after that, and made my first trip to China. So it was it was amazing, and I was just kind of mesmerized. And the way I kind of explain it to people is, we're all different versions of ourselves when we're in different situations. So you're one version of yourself when you're spending time with your partner. You're one version of yourself if you're spending time with children or nephews or other young family member. You're a different version of yourself when you're at work and dealing with your work colleagues. And I really liked the version of myself that was in China, traveling, because I just felt humble. I felt like I was learning. and I felt like I was seeing things that were important to share, and because they were things that I hadn't seen anyone else try to describe before, and that kind of just motivated me to get stuck in and try to make a living out of that space. And yeah, it took a while, but eventually got there.
So it sounds like you discovered a different country to what you were expecting.
I discovered a different Ryan. I think that's the best way to describe it. I think China let me figure out another version of myself that was beyond my athletic pursuits.
Mm. Well, I've had the privilege of popping into Hong Kong a couple of times, and I'm sure it's not the same as mainland China, but it seemed a very close comparison. And one of what two things I noticed whilst I was there was that the Chinese seemed to have a poor memory, but when it came to anything that happened between 1824 and 1997. And I went into a fascinating museum, which was just white walls and white floors. And that was, as far as they were concerned, was the history of Hong Kong between those two dates.
A
But
blank canvas.
yeah, a completely blank canvas. And the other place I went into was a tea museum, and that was absolutely fascinating because I always knew there was a lot of Chinese blends of tea, but what was really fascinating was how little. Well, they didn't actually know how many variations of tea there are.
Mm.
Uh, so, did you get to try some tea in China, and what did you think of
A-
it?
Absolutely. So one of the famous places you can go in China is called Hangzhou, and it's just about an hour train ride away from Shanghai, and it's famous because they have West Lake there, which is a very beautiful lake. And Hangzhou recently has become a little bit more famous because it's the hub of the technology industry. It's like the Silicon Valley of China. Alibaba is there, one of the bigger employers, one of the biggest companies in China. But Hangzhou, that whole area is very, very famous for high quality tea. So, one of the first things I did when I went to China was, or when I moved to Shanghai, was I took a trip and went to Hangzhou. And of course, it's a beautiful hilly mountainous area, and on the hills, they grow tea. So you get to go out and walk around through the tea plantations, and you see the women picking all the tea leaves and stuff like that. And yeah, I've got countless pictures of that kind of stuff. It was absolutely beautiful, and that's really like the Longjin, like green tea, which is quite famous. And no, it was beautiful. But then, when you go out west to Xinjiang, the tea is totally different. When you go south down to Tibet and stuff like that, the tea is totally different. So, living in China is really, really wild because I mean, and I think I could have lived in China my whole life, like, and never got tired of exploring it because I feel like it's so many different countries and so many different cultures and so many different religions all wrapped up in one, territorial region. And of course, the Chinese will hate it when people say that because they want everyone to think everyone's Han Chinese and everyone's unified and everyone's the same, but they're not. And the diversity that exists in China was just spectacular. And it's really a remarkable part of the world to travel in.
Yeah, and I guess in the time that you were there, you've been a witness, I suspect, to the way uh, China has evolved from a transport perspective. I mean, it's like night and day, isn't it?
Well, I mean, I didn't just get to see it; I got to report on it. So that was the dream, was getting a chance to work for the New York Times and Time, Newsweek, Forbes, and Fortune, and get to for I did that from about 2002 to 2012 before it stopped being a really viable career option. And I can get into that later if you want. But for 10 years, yeah, I mean, we were on the front page of the New York Times, every week, reporting from China, and it was great to be kind of on the pulse of what was happening in this country that was changing so rapidly, and the whole world was excited about it, and it was really amazing timing to be there, to be reporting um, when all of that was kind of happening and going down, because China just changed so much just before the Olympics in August 2020, in August 2008. and then after the Olympics. Those were kind of the two halves to my reporting journey there, and the positivity and the excitement and the energy, building up to 2008, and then yeah, just a bit of the chaos and stuff that happened afterwards. But it was a wild ride.
Do you think that as global citizens, we sometimes don't understand? It's not just it's not just a Chinese question, but it's. Do you think we sometimes misunderstand cultures, and really the only solution to that is to encourage more travel?
Yeah, I think, to be honest, I think we should encourage our politicians all around the world to travel a little more, and to see what the world is really like. Because I think the politicians are making the vast majority of the decisions for all of us, elected or unelected. And you can't have people in London, or in Washington D.C., making policy about China, who haven't traveled to China, who haven't walked down the streets of Shanghai and Beijing or Xi'an, or even more famously Wuhan, and really kind of understood what makes the average Chinese person tick. And this is the real dilemma. And of course, I think we should try to find a way to allow more students and young people to have gap years, and take opportunity to explore cultures other than their own, to go to countries where they don't speak the same native language that they speak, and having to get around, and having to learn, and having to learn how to speak different languages, translate, use your hands, get a meal, get things done, get to a tourist site that you want to see or something like that. I think all of those have a lot of lessons, life lessons built into them. And then, of course, being exposed to as many different cultures as you can, I think, makes you just a more humble and respectful person. And I think the world would be a much better place if we were all traveling a little bit more. But especially the key decision makers in our societies, they seem to be the ones that haven't traveled very much or in the right way, and really have no idea what's going on.
Mm, yes, I'm sure we would benefit from them traveling more. So you mentioned that you got into journalism and photography. So clearly, you're someone who has learned to love both. So what did you capture um, that that really inspired you to, well, to keep on in the photography space?
Yeah, it was just this massive growth that China was going through. So it was just the stories. I mean, when you take a country of 1.3 billion people, you've got 1.3 billion stories. And with the incredible economic transformation that was going on, you had huge amounts of wealth being created. You had people's lives changing, people's, their children's lives changing, their grandparents' lives changing, businesses were changing, policies were changing, the way the government, was trying to manage the economy was changing, and all of that change just led to huge amounts of friction. And then, of course, wherever the friction is where you find the stories. So, a migrant worker comes from the interior of China, comes to Shanghai, struggles for 5 years to make a living, and then all of a sudden, opens up his own business or her own business in Shanghai, and becomes a millionaire in a year. Now is driving a Ferrari. Their kids go to school in the United States. Those were stories we talked about, and those were stories we found, and those were huge success stories. And then we found other not so nice stories where governments would go in heavy-handed and move migrants off of a good piece of land, without compensating them properly, and then selling that land to some big property developer to put up super expensive flats. This happened everywhere in Shanghai and all through the country, really. So it was just endless, constant friction of how this new economy was going to shape everyone's lives. And some people really embraced it, and did well, and some people kind of broke even, and some people were severely harmed by it. So it's all those stories at every level were hugely exciting, and the pace of change was so fast that the stories were just endless.
Yeah. So You sound like you like noticing things. Do you think you've been able to capture all the main moments whilst you were there?
I mean, that's, all the main moments might be a little bit difficult, but we did our best, and we worked with integrity, and we worked to the best of our abilities. You can only do so much. But I mean, I've been to every province in China. I've reported from every province in China. I think I filmed actually now in every province in China. Like, I've just been everywhere. And I think I left China in 2018, um, and because I was traveling globally at the time for one of my big TV shows, and getting in and out of China and exploring the rest of the world was a little bit challenging just because of the flight connections and stuff like that. So I ended up moving to Dubai, which was a little bit more central and much easier for filming. And I feel like I kind of got out just at the right time because I feel once Xi Jinping declared himself emperor for life, which I think was 2016, Xi Jinping being the current president of China, he declared himself president for life, I think, in 2016. And normally they were working on 8-year rotations where they would change out the leadership. So once he did that, the temperature really changed in China for foreigners. Things got a little bit less welcoming, and I felt it immediately. So for me, it was really time to go. But but I was glad because I got out before COVID, and I had a lot of friends that were stuck when those lockdowns came in 2020, and they lasted 3 years, which is insane when you look back at it. But yeah, they had a pretty tough ride. So I always feel a little bit lucky I got out before that.
Yeah, yeah,
Mm.
I bet. So, uh, changes in life circumstances never happen smoothly, I find. So there was probably a period of time where whilst you were reporting and reporting from different places, where you felt like, well, I'd like to do more traveling independently and have more fun, and perhaps climb some mountains. So, what kind of transition did you go through that led you to wanting to, I don't know, going on trips up mountains or going on motorbikes, which I see you quite
Yeah.
like?
So I was using those as my holidays. So working with the New York Times and working in the journalism world is a high stress environment, and there's a lot of anxiety, and it can be very stressful. And in China, in many cases, it can also be dangerous because the Chinese authorities like to play this kind of cat and mouse game with journalists, and they like to follow you and chase you, and try to stop you from doing your reporting, which makes it very exciting but also exhausting. So anytime my writing partners or my regular writing partners would go on holiday, um, I would go out to the mountains. So I would fly from Shanghai out to places like Sichuan province and Yunnan province and Tibet, um, and just spend a week up in the mountains, hiking, climbing with a local guide, just kind of getting away from living in Shanghai, which is a huge, massive, bustling city of about 30 million people. And then also just getting away from my responsibilities as a journalist and a photographer and a writer, and just kind of enjoying the nature. And then around 2008, when we had the financial crisis, excuse me, um, when we had the financial crisis, one of the caveats of the financial crisis was that it also killed the publishing industry. Now, lots of people lost their homes, banks went bankrupt, people lost their jobs, their livelihoods. It was a complete disaster. But one of these little small things that happened that no one really talks about is it killed the print publishing industry, which was already on the verge of being on its knees. So, you know, in so there was a huge gap in work between 2008 and 2010, mainly caused by that Lehman Brothers collapse and the fallout that kind of the domino effect that continued after that. So by 2010, I was basically unable to make a living as a photographer and a writer. But I had done well for many years, and I had saved up some money, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to try to make a TV show, because I still want to travel, and I still want to explore, and I still want to have these adventures, but maybe just leave the journalism bit out of it because that was all very intense. And then maybe I can find a way to break into the TV world. So I actually funded my first TV show by myself. My brother and I rode motorcycles all the way around China. We set a Guinness World Record for the longest motorcycle trip in one country without backtracking or overlapping. And then we actually turned that into a 6-part TV series, which was on Travel Channel, which were our big early supporters before they kind of disappeared. I don't even think there is a Travel Channel anymore. But that was kind of how I did it. Like I started using my holidays from my journalism career as ideas for making new television shows. So I would leave Shanghai, go down to Yunnan province, Sichuan Bana, down on the borders with Myanmar and Vietnam and Cambodia. And I would, rent a motorcycle from a local farmer and ride motorcycles all through the hills for a few days and, just get some excitement out and see a different part of China. And then I was like, wow, this could be a TV show maybe. And then, going hiking in Tibet, I was like, this could be a TV show maybe. And then, so by the time I was ready to leave the photography and writing world, I had a lot of ideas for how I was going to move forwards with a new career, and that first motorcycle trip around China was really the beginning of it.
You make it sound relatively easy to organise a motorcycle trip around China. I'm sure it was far from that. Tell us a little bit how you plan such a journey like that.
Well, I think at the time it was quite nerve-wracking to think about trying to make television, and because I hadn't ever made television before and I didn't really know how to do it. So I think one of the big steps that I took was I recruited my brother, and I remember this very vividly. We were sitting in Central Park in March 2010, and he was like, "What are you going to do?" And I was like, "I don't think journalism's my way forward, and I want to make TV, and I think I want to ride a motorcycle around China and really show people, the China that I know, not necessarily the China that other people think they know, or the China that Fox News shows them, or the China that the Daily Mail shows them, or whatever country you live in, the BBC. I just wanted to show people my China, which I think was a more benevolent China and a more exciting China and a more diverse China than people really understood. So, in March 2020, I was like, Colin, he was about to take a bit of a gap year professionally. He had kind of exited one business and was going to take some time off and travel around the world. So I thought maybe he could start his trip by coming to China and we could go out on this adventure together. And I think having him and his support at the early stages really kind of kept me motivated. And then after that, it was, okay, how do we get motorcycles into China? BMW, can we get bikes in China? Can we get spare parts in China? What are the logistics like? What are the costs like? And then trying to figure out who will be the cinematographer, who will do the editing, what kind of music we needed. And then the end, it's like, okay, what do we, how do we plan day by day for 60 plus days? How do we keep an itinerary? What do we show people? Where do we stop? Where do we avoid? And I loved all that, actually. To be honest, people see me climbing mountains and walking across deserts and riding motorcycles around countries, but at the heart of it, I'm a producer. I love the logistical challenges. I love the technical challenges. I love planning, and I love being able to put all these things together and then share them with audiences all around the world. And it's great that I also get to be in the TV show, but the planning and then the execution and then the sharing is an overwhelmingly positive experience, and it's something that I fell in love with right away.
Well, clearly you did enjoy it.
Yeah.
So what was it about the biking around China that you felt during the actual journey?
Well, I mean, it was the same feeling I got in 2001 when I left Canada and went someplace new. And even though I'd been traveling around China for more than a decade at that stage, it was a new way to see all of China. And it was amazing to see China through my brother's eyes, who'd never really been to China before. It was amazing to ride a motorcycle around China. Like, normally in my journalism world, I would fly out of Shanghai to some other province or some other city and report from there, and then fly back to Shanghai like a normal person would do. As China developed more, we were taking the trains more because they have the most amazing high-speed train network, and just taking trains is much faster than going to an airport and spending all that time there. And then, but to be on a motorcycle, to be kind of totally free, to not have to go to a train station, to not have to go to an airport, and to feel the open road and to meet the people along the way, and to talk to people at all the gas stations and to meet all the truck drivers, that kind of experience was spectacular. And to be honest, it was almost like reintroducing me to China, because China by road is a very different than China by air or China by train. And it was really a wonderful journey. And it kind of, we had a lot of challenges along the way. There were some bureaucratic issues, there were some breakdowns, but it was such a wonderful, freeing experience to be on the road every day, to be exploring every day, be seeing something new every day. And then, of course, the highlight of all that was to also be filming it and being able to share those experiences with a massive audience. And that show was like 14 years ago, I think we filmed it, and it's still one of the most watched things I've ever made. And it's probably the poorest quality of everything I've ever made. Like we didn't have drones, we weren't using 4K cameras. We only had one cameraman, we didn't have two. Like some of the audio recording was pretty spotty because it was our first tryout. But people love that show because it's just kind of raw, and we were running and gunning, which is a term you use in filmmaking, where you're just moving quickly and not really setting up too much at each location. But people loved it because it had its own energy and it had a kind of adrenaline to it. And it just kind of set the course. And I was just like, when I finished that, I was like, wow, that's the hardest thing I've ever done, and that's the most rewarding thing I've ever done, and that's all I ever want to do.
Yeah. Well, I never thought I would say it, but it almost feels like you were experiencing slow travel.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, and then after that, I fell in love with hiking and climbing and trekking. So I did a couple motorcycle shows. We did one in China, one in India, both with Colin, my brother, and then I did one by myself in Brazil. And I'm trying to actually get started again. We're going to do another Tough Rides motorcycle series in early 2025. But then I started like, I don't want to just be a motorcycle guy. Like I have so many more interests. I love riding bikes, but I love hiking and climbing and trekking and walking across deserts and climbing high mountains. And then I started, building out that series, and that was a series called Extreme Treks on BBC Earth. And we did 4 seasons of that before COVID, and we're going to be getting back to doing that in 2025 as well. So it was nice to have these kind of two genres I could dip my toes in and out of. I was able to go, and make a motorcycle adventure show, and I had the partners and the sponsors to help me with that, and I had a broadcaster for that. And then I also had the adventure trekking and climbing and exploration show with Extreme Treks, and I had my partners and my sponsors and my broadcaster for that. So from 2010 or 11 to 2020, it was just smooth sailing. We were able to make a lot of great content, and we had a really great decade just traveling the world and exploring and having the chance to share those stories with the viewing public.
Yeah. So it sounds like you had the trekking and mountaineering idea in the back of your head for a little while. So how did the logistics vary planning for trekking and mountaineering versus what you did for biking?
It's all about electricity, my man. So most of the time when you're riding a motorcycle around a country like China or India or Brazil, where I have a lot of experience, you're staying in a hotel every night. So it can be it can be like a bed and breakfast, it can be a hostel, it can be a 5-star hotel. But for the most part, you have electricity every night, which means you can charge your batteries, your camera batteries, your GoPro batteries, your helmet there's so many batteries. And then every, there were 2 or 3 times in China where we camped out. There was maybe like a week in Brazil where we were in our hammocks camping out. So we had to prepare a little bit for those, had extra batteries. But for the trekking and stuff like that, like we go out and we walk across a desert for 12 or 14 days. We do 120, 140 kilometers. What's that, like 80, 90 miles. And there's no electricity, and there's no running water, and there's nothing. So we really had to figure out how to logistically make each show and make sure we had enough batteries, we had enough power, and then of course we had enough ideas, like what are we going to capture if we're just out here by ourselves for 4 days and there's no civilization. Like where do we get the stories? What's the narrative of this stretch of the trip? And we're always thinking about, like, what is the audience feeling right now? Like what do they want to ask me? excuse me, what do they want to know about how I'm feeling or how the trip is going? So yeah, it was a wonderful kind of transition to be able to go back and forth on those two shows and to be able to figure out the logistics of each one, which were hugely different.
Yeah.
Mm.
So, do you think that mountains have a special attraction for people who like climbing them? Is there a certain allure of a magic of achieving something that very few people do?
I think I think for me, and I think a lot of people share this, there's a real strange kind of spirituality in it, that goes way beyond organized religion. Like there's a connection you feel to a place, to nature, um, to that kind of achievement that kind of makes you feel connected in a really spiritual and powerful way, um, but doesn't have anything to do with the organized religions that are being shopped around the world these days. But I feel nature has real power, and if you really connect with that power, it can. I don't know. I think it can really make your life a lot better. I feel like, the healthiest I've ever felt in my whole life was in 2019 when I slept out in nature in a tent. I think I did like 150 nights in a tent in 2019, um, out in various countries all around the world. I think in 2019 we did 10 expeditions in 10 different countries in 10 months. And just being outside, sleeping in the desert, sleeping on the side of a mountain, waking up every day, not being on your phone, not being on a laptop, not watching TV, living with the rhythm of the earth, living with the natural setting and rising of the sun, no artificial light. That was just completely bliss. And I feel like deep in our deep in our deep in our subconscious, I feel like, that's the way we kind of lived thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago. I'm not an archaeologist or historian that goes back that deep, but whenever it was that we were kind of semi-nomadic, roaming the lands, hunting and gathering, there's something, I don't know, there's something that unlocks in our brains, in our psyches, in our minds, in our bodies when we kind of go back to that. And I found it very freeing, I found it had incredibly positive effects on me personally, from a physical and mental health perspective.
Yeah, well, I can't imagine because I have not done too much of that myself, but I do appreciate nature, and I think there's a lot we can learn from it. I
Hmm.
think there's kind of about 50 miles from me. There's like a nature reserve, and one of the things what they've done is it's like a mini estuary, and animals are allowed to roam very freely, and there's lots of water birds, and there's a group of people that the English love to call twitters because they just spend all their days taking pictures of flying birds or walking birds. And what struck me about the view was that there wasn't any people in it. And I think, 150, 200 years ago, we would have been out there with them, experiencing life um, exactly as it was intended. And I think I read a book recently about, you know, waking up naturally according to the um, life's daily rhythms is actually quite a powerful thing to adopt. And actually, I've not had to use an alarm clock since because relying on yourself to wake and sleep is actually determined by other factors.
Yeah. No, it's lovely. I mean, when you're out in the middle of a desert, we did the talk we crossed the Taklamakan Desert in 2016, and then we crossed the Badain Jarain Desert both in China in 2018, I think. And both of those were 130, 140 kilometer journeys. But you wake up at 5 o'clock when the sun comes up, you warm yourself up, you have a coffee, have some breakfast, pack up, load up the camels, and then you walk for 6 or 8 hours nonstop through really beautiful but difficult terrain. And then you settle down at 3 or 4 in the afternoon. You unpack, you make some tea, you have dinner, and then the sun goes down at 6 p.m. and you go to bed at 6:30 because that's all there is. There's no television, there's no internet, there's no one to call. There's no reason for you to be up once the sun goes down and it's freezing. So you get in your sleeping bag, you get in your tent, and you go to bed at 6, and maybe you wake up in the middle of the night once, but then, you wake up at 4:35 when the sun starts to come up again. And of course, we're filming sunrises and sunsets as well. So it was a nice kind of way to button the end of a day and the beginning of a day. And it's just so healthy to live like that. It's not about 8 hours a day. It's not about 10 hours a day. It's about kind of living more in rhythm with the earth and with nature. And I think that's the key to really, really feeling the energy that nature can give you.
So, what did you notice about deserts that perhaps you wouldn't have noticed um, if you hadn't have gone on a trip across one?
Well, they're incredibly soothing, and they're desolate. So, climbing a mountain is, from a motivational standpoint, climbing a mountain is really easy, because you're either going up or you're going down, right? And the higher you go, one step at a time up, one step at a time up. It's exhausting and excruciatingly painful sometimes, but it's motivating because you're going in the right direction, and you feel yourself advancing, and you feel the effort you're putting in, and you feel the reward at the end of the day when you get to the next camp, which is higher than the previous camp. And those little triggers all feed our ego and feed our emotions, and it's wonderful, because you really feel like, yeah, today we made it to camp 2. That was really hard, but we did it, right? But in the desert, there's no feeling like that at all, because you're just walking, and you don't know why you're walking in this direction and not that direction or the other direction or east, west, north. Like, you're just following a guide who knows the way, but everything looks the same. And there's absolutely no visual cue for being successful or being a failure. There's no visual cue that will motivate you for, finishing a day or achieving some goal for the day. Like, there's nothing. You're just kind of endlessly walking. And that brings out like some crazy feelings of like hopelessness. But it also is kind of really freeing too, because you kind of have to put faith in the guide and the camel drivers, to get us to the next camp. And it's very freeing and kind of meditative to give up that control and to just kind of follow a process, and to kind of be in the middle of such a hopeless space, but know that you need to trust people to keep you safe and healthy. And uh and it, and it just, I feel like that was the real mental hitch that you need to kind of get over when you're doing these big desert trips. And I love them. I mean, we're looking at doing something in the Gobi Desert in 2025 with Extreme Trek Season 5, and I was just planning it the other day, and it looked epic. And I just feel like the desert has a lot of special qualities, I think, which are also kind of can help rejuvenate you and help kind of reconnect you with nature. Like, sleeping on the sand every night, whether you're in a tent or not. The difficulty of walking in the sand. You walk 10 kilometers on a paved road, and you walk 10 kilometers in the sand. It's not the same 10 kilometers, right? It's completely different as you're sliding all the time in the sand. And it really does add a lot of pain and strain to the day. But it's just so freeing and so rewarding. And also too, like, people are climbing Everest, and you see pictures on social media of like thousands of people lined up to try to get to the summit of Mount Everest. Out in the desert, there's no one. Like, we've done massive trips across the desert, and we've never met anyone, no locals, no tourists, nothing. So it's incredibly isolating, and in some ways incredibly freeing as well. And I'll always choose an adventure experience where there's less people to meet than more.
Mm. Well, it sounds fascinating. Um, my only experience of a desert is going across Australia by train, and it was fascinating because I think if it had been as I expected it to be, it would have looked the same all the way across. But it had rained heavily for 2 months in Australia before I left Sydney, and it was 2/3 of the trip was green.
Oh, wow.
Uh, and it just made me think that deserts must contain a lot more uh, in them than we give them credit for. If it suddenly
Absolutely.
rained, if it suddenly rained in an area of the world that didn't normally rain, something would grow.
Hmm. Yeah.
uh, and that
No, I
left a
mean,
lasting impression on me.
well, that's the beauty of travel, right? You never know when it's going to rain and when you're going to be in a drought, and you never know what you're going to see. Like you can read 100 guidebooks, you can look at 100 pictures on the internet, you can watch 100 feeds of YouTube travelers who have done similar journeys, and but when you go there, it can be totally different from all of that, and that's the excitement. That's what keeps us exploring.
Yeah. So you mentioned Brazil. How different an experience was that after China?
Yeah, so we made a TV show called Tough Rise Brazil. We filmed it in 2015. I think it came out in 2016. It was wonderful. Like my brother had retired by that stage, so he decided not to join me on any more television shows. He did Tough Rides China with me. He did Tough Rides India with me. But he was kind of moving towards getting a job and having a bit more of a normal life. And but yeah, I really wanted to explore Brazil, and went down to Brazil, and we did a really beautiful kind of 60-day journey around Brazil, starting and finishing in Rio de Janeiro, and we started going north, up the coast, up to Salvador, and then around to Santarém, and then along the Amazon River to Manaus. And then we took the BR 319, the Road of Ghosts, down to Portobello, and then through the Pantanal, Iguazu Falls, Sao Paulo, and then back to Rio. So it was a really nice kind of circumnavigation of Brazil. But one of the things that we didn't really account for was just how hard it would be spending, like, I think we were 3.5 weeks or 4 weeks out of the 2 months in the Amazon in the mud. And northern Brazil is all Amazon, and in South America, as you go further north, it gets hotter, and that's where the jungle is. You go further south, it gets kind of more, you kind of gets more into forests and more into different landscapes. But northern Brazil is all Amazon, and we knew it would be interesting, but I just didn't know how absolutely brutal the Amazonian mud would be, and how sticky it would be, and how much it would rain every day in the rainforest, and some days it rained 6 days, 6 times, and it just the ground was wet and then dry, wet then dry, wet then dry. You just couldn't get any grip. I was slipping off my motorcycle 5 or 6 times a day. Had the right tires, had the right motorcycle, but it just didn't make a difference for that Amazonian mud. So I really learned how to ride on mud, which is a skill most people don't get the chance to do, is do 30 straight days on grueling, painful, knee-deep mud, in some cases. But yeah, we got through it, and Brazil is a really magical, wonderful country. We made a lot of friends, and I think we made a really, really nice TV series. And I was really glad too, because I was a bit nervous going into the show without my brother Colin, because I hadn't done one without him yet at that stage. But I was pretty confident we could still pull it off, and it was really nice, actually. And instead of my brother and I talking on camera all the time, I was really forced to interact more with local people, and I think that was the thing I really loved the most, because I think when you travel with another partner who's hosting a TV show with you, a lot of the audience wants to hear you guys talking back and forth about how tough things are, or how amazing things are, and things like that. But without that, I was having those conversations with local people, and that really, I think, strengthened the bond of the connection of the people I met along the way. So I was really thankful for that.
So, would it be true to say then that there are at least two kinds of Brazil? There's the people we see living in the big cities, but then there's very much the rural areas. Are the differences that big?
Oh, I mean, they're even bigger. I mean, Brazil's amazing. I mean, Brazil is probably the most ethnically diverse country I've ever been in. They have African and Brazilian people who are descendants from the slave trade. They have Portuguese, they have Italians, they have Spanish, they have it's, and then they have the Aboriginal people, like the North American or South American, Indian or Native American tribes, that were there before everyone. So it is just an absolute massive mix of people and perspectives and religions, and it was really kind of an exciting place to be. And yeah, I mean, any country you go to will have city people and rural countryside people, and we met them all. And and it was really quite lovely. Like, we stayed in the middle of the Amazon with this Amazonian farmer. He fished one of the tributaries of the Amazon River. We stayed with him and his family, for a night or two in the middle of the jungle. It was amazing. And then we're staying at, 5-star hotels in Rio de Janeiro, and meeting all the people in the hotels. And then we're out in, on a boat in, on the Amazon River. Because from Santarém, if you look on a map, um, one of the roads we took finishes at this town called Santarém, and then there's no road anymore. You have to take a boat along the Amazon to get to the next highway, and it ended up being like a 3-day journey. And we were on this beautiful boat called the Ana Beatriz, along the Amazon River, for 3 nights. And we met just the most wonderful people on the boat, and everyone was excited to see what we were filming. And then you come onto this boat, and there's a big SUV and a nice motorcycle, and of course we got everyone's attention. We were also the only white people, but it was wild. Everywhere we went, we just met really nice and sweet people. And of course, everyone has a different story to tell and a different reason for being in the place they were, and that's kind of what kept us motivated to keep going every day and telling these wonderful stories.
That seems to be a common theme that I receive from having conversations with different travelers, is that basically humans are very curious animals. We're very curious of each other, of people coming and going or living in a certain area all their lives. And it's curiosity that is almost like a fuel, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. It is. I mean, getting to see something every day is amazing, and something new every day. Like, every night when I went to bed, on one of these motorcycle trips, for example, I was producing the show, so I knew what we were going to see the next day, and I knew, where we were going to go, but I didn't know how it was going to play out, or what was really going to happen, or who we were going to meet. But every day you go to bed, you're like, wow, I'm exhausted, body hurts, but wow, we got some great footage today, and I just can't wait to see what's going to happen tomorrow. And that alone is just so addictive and so motivating, and so exciting. And that's why, I live here in Beverly Hills now, and I talk to people in the film and television industry all the time, and they say the same thing. It's the same as being on a film set. You got your lines for the next day, you've got your scenes for the next day, but you have no idea what magic is gonna happen in the studio, or on set, or something like that. And it's the same for us. We just go out, and we've got our cameras, we've got our motorcycles, we've got, our spare parts, we've got some food, and we just go out, and we just try to see, when we have no idea really what's going to happen day in and day out, apart from maybe which road we're going to be on and which hotel we're going to stay at the next night. But everything else is kind of up for grabs, and it's up for us to tell the story, and decide what to stop and film and what not to. And it was really wonderful just to have that kind of freedom, to explore every day, without having anyone else tell you what to do, is really wonderful.
Yeah, it brings out the creative side, I think.
Absolutely.
So one of the things, or one of the narratives we often hear about Brazil, and it's obviously mostly by people looking from the outside in, it never seems to be too long, does it, before somebody's saying, oh, there's another part of the Amazon being chopped down, in preference for, I don't know, agriculture, or for beef, for
Yeah,
example.
animal herding is the big one.
So did you see any evidence of that happening on your journeys?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Amazon jungle is, a shadow of its former self. There's a lot of land that's been burned, so they slash and burn, um, and then they bring in the animals, basically, because beef is such a big business, in Brazil. And there's really very poor protection, and you could feel it, actually. Like, sometimes we would be traveling through the Amazon, and we'd be surrounded by trees and lush forest, or jungle everywhere, and the weather, and it was so cool and so damp and so wet, when you've got all these trees around you, and you're riding through the mud of the Amazon, but you're kind of in this beautiful protected rainforest, and it was just lovely. And then you would come out of the rainforest, and then you would come out, and you do, 50 kilometers where they've clear cut the entire rainforest, and it's just all farms. And it would be just so hot and so brutal, and the temperature would rise in the sun, and there's There was no shade or anything like that. You're just getting absolutely like cooked. And then after a while, you dip back into the rainforest again. You'd be like, oh, thank God! Like now it's nice and cool again, and it's a little wet, and then we can take a breather, take a rest. So you can see how the temperatures around the world are increasing, as we're getting rid of everything that cools down our temperature. And traveling through Brazil, like in and out of the rainforest, and in and out of these pockets where they've cleared and pockets where they've left the original rainforest, you can absolutely feel and understand that. And yeah, I mean, as countries get wealthier, they eat more meat, and I saw that in China with pork production and pork consumption, and in Brazil it's beef. Brazil and Argentina, it's absolutely beef, and it's just yeah, it's hard to reconcile, where the dietary needs of a growing population are more important than protecting the natural environment, and where that trade-off is, and how to balance all those interests. It's not easy, but I've definitely seen a ton of it, and it was brutal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's take a slightly different direction now.
Sure.
You talked about the importance of storytelling. It seems to be an important thread in everything you've done. At some point, you decided that storytelling is good when you're actually talking to people about it. So you went into speaking and public speaking. So how did that come about? And
Well, I realized, like, it wasn't soon after I started doing my work in China, my journalism work and my writing and photography work in China, that people loved hearing my stories. So I would go to these dinner parties, and I would go out for drinks with friends, and I tell them, oh, I just came back from some crazy place in China, and I took these photos, and I lived with this family, and I found this Catholic church that French missionaries built over 100 years ago, and the whole village was Catholic or something like that. And those are real stories, by the way. And people were blown away. They're like, wow, that exists in China. I had no idea. I'm talking to bankers and lawyers and, expats living in Shanghai and things like that. Just have no idea what the country's really like. And then I was like, maybe I should talk more. But I didn't know how to do it. So the first thing I did was I reconnected with the University of Toronto, and I reconnected with my professor who taught me in my second year that Introduction to Modern China class. His name was Victor Falkenheim, Professor Victor Falkenheim. And I wrote directly to him, and I'm like, Mr. Falkenheim, Professor Falkenheim, I was in your class like 3 years ago, and I loved it. And it motivated me to go and explore China, and I'm still there, and I'm a journalist, and I'm a writer and a photographer, and I would love to come back and speak in your class. And he loved the idea. And I was really lucky that he gave me such positive feedback on that first kind of trial run, because that might have ended it right there. But he loved the idea. And then I started going back to the University of Toronto every year. This was like 2003, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Started going back to the University of Toronto every year, speaking in his class. And then the word got out that I was coming back and speaking in the classes. And then I started doing classes for larger parts of the university, and then for the entire university and stuff like that. And that kind of built up. And then I started doing, speaking engagements for Fortune 500 companies all around the world. And I speak still at a lot of universities. And actually, I love speaking at boarding schools. A lot of boarding schools fly me in to do talks. Like, there's a lot of posh boarding schools around the world, and sometimes they fly me in because a lot of kids, they don't understand, how to get into alternative careers. They think maybe they just have to be a banker, a doctor, or a lawyer, and that's what their parents do, and that's all there is. And then I come in and, blow their mind and say, actually, you can make a living like this, or you can be doing this, or you can try this, or you can travel, you can take time off and travel and find yourself before you commit to something. And I really like the light bulbs going off in all these kids' brains about, oh, it doesn't have to be, the way my mom and dad explain it, or the way society, forces everyone into thinking, various things that are both helpful and harmful. It just come in and give people positive and exciting alternatives, but also, not to necessarily wear rose-colored glasses. Like, it's a tough journey. There's a lot of job insecurity. It can be quite difficult to pull off in a lot of ways, but if you can, and you're determined enough to do it, there's a path forward.
Did it surprise you that a lot of wealthy families' children uh, weren't as worldly as perhaps um, people might think?
Well, they're worldly, but okay, like there's parents that take their kids to like Nepal, and then there's parents that take their kids to Ibiza, or Mallorca, or the west coast, the coast of Portugal or something like that. Like, I think like wealthy parents, they travel with their kids, and but it's a lot to the same places, and it's a lot to places where you can ski or eat well, right? But they're not like I don't really see like a lot of wealthy parents taking their kids on the Annapurna Trail in Nepal, which is a very touristy thing to do, but it's a wonderful trip because you get to stay with local villagers every night in their guest houses and meet the local villagers and talk to the local villagers, and it's a really kind of a beautiful cultural interaction. Plus, you get to walk through the Himalayas, which is one of the most spectacular backdrops in the world. So, I think wealthy people do travel with their kids, but they just keep traveling kind of to the same places all the time, and then it's up to the kids to really think outside the box and tell mom or dad they want to have a real cultural experience and explore something really outside the box, or whether they're just going to go to the Monaco GP again, and for the seventh time, or I don't know, go to Vegas, or any of these other kind of posh places where people go and network and stuff like that. But do they really want to get off the grid? Is it something they can even do? Is it something that people do? Like, these are questions that kind of sometimes I show up and answer.
Fascinating.
Yeah,
Well, it seems like humans are creatures of habit right across the social spectrum.
absolutely. Yeah. And people like their comforts too, right? So, you know, why, if you can stay at a five-star hotel and watch the Monaco Grand Prix, why would you want to sleep on the floor in a dirty guest house, in northern Nepal? But it's it's all about what feeds your soul.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, um, travel is a mixture of different things, and when you go on your treks and biking, there's obviously a physical element to it. There's no point um, going into them without knowledge of your body and yourself. Do you think the mental side of it is a very important element that perhaps some people overlook?
Yes. So, I've climbed mountains all around the world. And, I keep myself in pretty good shape. I played basketball in university, so I understood fitness at a pretty high level. I understand how to take care of my body. I understand how to listen to my body. I understand what my body needs when and how. And I think that's a huge advantage that a lot of people don't have. But beyond the physical elements, for example, mountain climbing and walking across deserts and stuff like that, it really is like 90% mental. Like, if you can run on a treadmill for 20 minutes without stopping at an average pace, you can do pretty much every adventure I've ever done. Like, I'm not a super athlete. I can't run a marathon. I've never run a marathon. I'm not a triathlete. I'm not a world record sprinter or anything like that. I just don't give up. And I'm okay with being uncomfortable. I think that's the most important thing. Like, if so for example, there was this one day we were filming in Bolivia, and we walked about 10 hours that day. It was a pretty grueling day, but we walked from maybe 1,000 feet in elevation up to about 3,000 feet or 3,500 feet in elevation. So it was a big altitude gain, and it just rained the whole day. So at the beginning in the morning, you're having breakfast and it's like, oh, it's nice, warm rain. We're down at a low altitude and look how cute the rain is and blah, blah, blah. But by late afternoon, and you increase by 2,500 meters, now all of a sudden it's snow and it's hail, and you've got to still be loving it. And I just remember loving it. Like, I just remember loving, like, I can't believe we're just walking through all these climatic zones. I can't believe we're walking and the weather's all changing around us, and it's so cool. And yeah, I was wet, but I was kind of excited by it. And 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 taking step after step after step. I think we probably did like 30 kilometers that day, maybe about 20 miles in the rain, and I just loved it. And it was just wonderful and exhilarating to be in that part of the world, rain or shine. And I think that kind of, mentality of not getting too in your own head, and just kind of letting the trip be the trip instead of trying to control it, and then just making sure it's one step at a time no matter what. And I think that's the real key to adventure, right? The real key to adventure is throwing away control, and being able to roll with the punches of whatever the adventure is going to dish out next. And if you're in control all the time and you're dictating all the time, then you're not really on an adventure, because you kind of know what's going to happen next. So just throwing yourself out into the world. Obviously, you need to be safe. Obviously, it's great to have a local guide who's done the trips before, who can spot out dangers, or understand when the weather's changing unpredictably. But after that, you kind of just have to roll with the punches and be totally okay with that. And for me, that's just a natural state of being. Again, playing sports, right? Like you train Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday as hard as you possibly can for games on Friday and Saturday. That was our schedule anyways in university. And you had no idea what was going to happen on the weekend. Like, you could train, you could not miss one shot Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and feel like a hero. And then on Friday you don't make any shots and you're 0 for 10, right? And your whole team is like, what the fuck? Like, you were amazing all week and you just played like absolute crap. Like, you just have no idea what's going to happen. And for you, I think it's a lot easier to embrace adventure if you are able to embrace the unknown, and you don't need to control in order to have fun.
And in fact, it's probably true to say that the less controlled, the more fun.
In a lot of ways, yeah. Again, like, I hope everyone out there is not thinking I'm reckless by saying this. I mean, it's not a reckless thing to say. Like, we absolutely have safety precautions. We absolutely have a medical kit with us. We absolutely have a sat phone with us. We have ways of communicating with people if there's real problems. Um, but once all those boxes are ticked off, just put your head down and go, and don't complain, and don't get upset, and don't try to control things, and don't wish the sun was out when it's not, and don't wish you had clouds when the sun is out. Just accept whatever nature's throwing at you, and just know that today you've got to work through it, and then tomorrow you got to wake up and do the same thing again. And I think, like, we've become a society, I think, that overthinks, and I think in a lot of cases we think ourselves out of doing wonderful things. Like, like I talk to people all the time, and they're like, "Oh, I would love to climb Mount Kilimanjaro," and I'm like, "Wow, you should go." Like, Mount Kilimanjaro is a relatively easy mountain to climb. It's 5,800 meters above sea level or something like that, but it's on the equator, so the weather's quite temperate, and the guides are amazing, and the way they move people up the mountain, and the way they take care of people, and the way they manage people's altitude sickness and things like that, and the way they feed you is all really great. And it's a really safe environment to try to push yourself a little bit. And but I've talked to people for 3 years, year after year, and they're like, "Oh, this year I'm going to go to Kilimanjaro," but they never go. And I think they just overthink it, or they just psych themselves out. The best way to go to Kilimanjaro is just book a ticket and go. Like, don't go to the gym for 3 months and train. Don't hire a personal trainer to get, just go. Like, you'll probably be okay. Just throw yourself out there and see what's what. And if you fail, come back, learn from your failures, address your failures, address how you think you can overcome your failures, and then go back out. Failure is amazing, because if you learn something, you can always recalibrate and do things better the next time.
It's very much like playing sport, isn't it?
It really is. The just not knowing what's going to happen and not really caring, is such a strength when you're out there. Just because if you're out there overthinking it, you're not going to be having fun, and then you're not going to really enjoy this magical place that you are. And it doesn't matter what the weather's like, or it doesn't matter whether you're one day behind or one day ahead of your schedule. Just be out loving it. And so few people can really do that, because I think in this era that we live in, we're just all trying to micromanage and control and overthink, and I think it's really just killing off all the joyful parts of this magical world we live in.
Certainly, living in the present is a good thing to aim for, and
Absolutely.
something I've heard quite a bit of. One thing that has surprised me about travel is that uh, loneliness can come at you in the most unexpected situations, and it was one of the most important lessons I think I've ever learned on travel. Um, it wasn't it wasn't a problem logistically. It wasn't that I didn't know where I was going next. It was just that I suddenly had a moment where I perhaps didn't know what was next. Um, I felt out of control, which we've just been talking about it being a good thing. But I suddenly realized, gosh, I don't have anything to do. Um, I know what I'm supposed to be doing in 24 or 48 hours, but I don't know what I'm going to do now. And I just felt this strange wave going across me. And I thought, well, I've just got to snap myself out of this and go and walk outside. Um, and it taught me a good lesson because I thought, well, I asked the local bed and breakfast person, oh, where's the nearest X, Y, and Z? And I just went out and found it. And actually, the experience I got from forcing myself to step out of that situation as soon as possible was one of the best things um, I did. I was just wondering, you know, what you would advise other travellers who suddenly perhaps feel a sudden feeling of doubt or wishing they were somewhere else.
Yeah, just embrace it. I mean, the only way we grow in our life is by embracing discomfort or existing outside of our comfort zone. That's the only way to really get anything done. So, you just have to decide if you're going to be someone who gets something done, and in which case you have to embrace discomfort and you have to work outside your comfort zone and feel a little out there and feel a little exposed and feel a little lost and feel a little confused and still have the wherewithal to push on. I think that's where we really make things happen. That's where the rubber meets the road. That's where we grow. And I think, for people who just want to visit the same places all the time and stay within their comfort zone, and they'll have a wonderful life, and they'll have lots of meaning in their life and everything will be great, but they'll never feel that real sense of growth and development and that real idea of challenging yourself, and coming out stronger on the other side, which I feel is a great thing for everyone to experience.
Absolutely. Well, one thing I notice you do is that you help high-end individuals with their travel and lifestyle choices.
Yeah.
Um, I think it's a very interesting subject because the one thing I've noticed working in the IT industry for a long time is in the past 30 years, the internet has made travel more accessible. Yet I come across a lot of people who are not necessarily confident enough to go and do something about it. I think, would you agree that there's perhaps a perception that high net worth individuals have all the options, whereas perhaps there's a misunderstanding that perhaps the tools that they use are equally accessible? Do you think that there's some truth in that?
Yeah, I think a lot of people who have become very wealthy, in their lives, usually are people who have specialized in one thing and gone very deep on it. Just the way I was when I played basketball in my early days. You don't become a very well-rounded individual when you're just focused on one thing and you take it really, really, really seriously and you go very deep on it. So a lot of these people I've met, they're incredibly powerful and successful and intelligent business people, but they don't understand adventure, or they don't understand what kind of things are accessible to them. They don't understand what kind of experiences that they can have. And I started taking some friends out, on my TV shows, and to be in the background or to be off camera and stuff like that, because I wanted to share this amazing experience with people, not just on camera, but also um, out in the wild. And then it became also a way for me to fund my television shows, because I would charge people to come out with me, because obviously the trips are expensive. And if I can offset some of those costs by bringing some people along with me and bringing friends or people that I know, who will really respect the journey as much as I do, then it's a win-win. So I make my TV shows independently, which means I have to raise the funding by myself through these VIP experiences or through corporate partnerships. And then I make the show myself, and then afterwards I sell it to the broadcaster. And we basically have to do that because the broadcaster doesn't want to pay up front because there's so much risk involved in my show. Like, what happens if I go to Brazil to do a motorcycle show and I get hit by a car on day one in Rio de Janeiro, right? TV show is finished. But if I assume all the risk, which I do, um, and then I'm successful at completing the show, which I have been thus far, knock on wood, then everyone is happy. So, but it just means I have to put the money up front first, and I do that, working with corporate partners, doing these VIP adventure experiences and my speaking engagements, and from all of that, I'm able to kind of pool enough capital to go back into the production and hire my amazing crew and then go back out into the world and keep telling stories. So the problem with COVID over the last few years is people just haven't been traveling very much and people haven't been willing to go too far abroad. So these VIP experiences have been a little bit hard. The corporate partnerships have also been a little bit difficult because people are asking more questions. They're a little bit less risk averse than they were in 2019. And then the broadcasters just don't know what they want. Like television tastes are changing. Everything is streaming. Linear broadcasters are dying. So it's a real moment of change. And I'm hoping that we'll all be able to kind of solidify into something, and people will start craving the authentic adventure TV shows that I make again, which I think are coming back very soon, and hopefully 2025 will be very busy.
Yeah. Well, one thing I noticed over the pandemic was that it changed a lot of habits.
Yeah.
I was writing an article today about how people suddenly realized how much they could, um, how many goods and services they could pay for online and have delivered to their homes. And if they were so inclined, they'd never have to leave their homes ever again. They could have everything
Yeah.
delivered. But once the most of the lockdowns finished, I think there's been a massive surge in travel. I mean, one of the statistics I've read for this year is that more people in human history will have traveled by plane by the end of this year than ever before. Um, so it's interesting, isn't it, how uh, people's habits have changed um, in ways unexpected. Was it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a bit of like revenge travel where people were locked up for so long and now they finally have the chance to get out and see the world and they want to. And then also too, a lot of people died during COVID, so people are thinking, why am I going to wait to take that amazing trip that I've always wanted to take? I'm just going to do it now. And there's this whole idea of maybe not waiting until you retire to live your life or to do fun things because another pandemic can come around anytime and kill us all or lock us all up. So I feel like people are trying to live a little bit more in the moment, which I think is great. People are excited to travel again after not traveling for so many years, which I also think is great. And then the other thing is I just hope people travel for a purpose. If you need to relax, go find a place to relax. If you want to learn, you want to go to museums, you want to go to art galleries, travel for a real purpose. If you want to go and have an adventure or really challenge yourself, I can list off 100 places where you can go do that. So, it's nice to see people getting back out into the space.
A word that gets banded around rather a lot is sustainable. And I've seen a few examples and I've been impressed with them in terms of their approaches, whether it be food production and having restaurants and no traveling, or about remote islands where only so many people can visit at a time. But the one constant that seems to run through it is, I wonder how or whether it's possible to be to do sustainable travel at scale. How do you see it?
Yeah, I mean, sustainability is a real challenge because it's like, if I fly from Los Angeles to Nepal, I will, I will accrue CO2 emissions because I'm part of an airplane flight that travels from LA to Nepal. But if I get to Nepal and then I walk for 3 weeks in the Himalayas using my own 2 feet, and then I'm living with local families who have solar panels on their roof and I'm contributing to their local economy. And then I get back on a plane in Nepal and I fly back to LA, also accruing CO2. It's like, have I done more harm by flying to Nepal, or have I done more benefit by walking through Nepal and not accruing any CO2, and also contributing to local families and local economies and stuff like that? And I don't know, it's a real kind of catch-22, these conversations, and I feel them to be like really circular. Like, I just feel like, one year it's like, okay, everyone needs electric cars, and then the next year it's like, okay, airlines are killing the world, and then the next year it's like our farming practices and our desire to eat beef is killing the Amazon, or taking up too much land, and then the solutions, we need solar, we need electric cars, we need all of these things, and I think all of it is true. To some level, all of it's kind of happening, and all of it's kind of important. um but I don't think it should stop us from doing the things that we really love. I think we should be conscious of it. Um, but at the same time, I do believe that technology will advance enough over time to help us with the activities that we love most, and make those activities more sustainable. So, if today everyone stops flying, the airlines will fall apart and there will be no desire to make fuel for airplanes that is more sustainable. If everyone stops driving today, there will be no reason for Tesla to make more battery powered cars, or BYD, or wherever, all these other companies, to keep innovating and keep making their products better. So at some stage, we have to keep kind of doing what we're doing and behaving as we behave, potentially just more consciously if possible. But we have to keep funding the industries that are going to innovate and create the change. And then the real question is, whether they're going to take profit from my airplane ticket, um, at the end of the year, and invest in more sustainable technology, or whether they're just going to give it all back to shareholders. And that's for the companies to decide and for the governments to regulate. Um, and yeah, we can vote with our feet and we can vote with our wallets and we can do all these things. But you also shouldn't be restricting yourself from doing the things that you really love just because it involves flying on a plane. Because you can do a lot of good by flying on a plane and visiting another part of the world and putting your hard-earned money into other people's pockets. So I also believe that's an important financial exchange, and then it's also important cultural exchanges to have those experiences around the world. And I hope that sustainability doesn't somehow stop us from all learning and exploring and understanding different parts of the world, because I think that would maybe make the world an even worse place. So I hope we can find some kind of balance in this big mess around sustainability, of which I know there is no easy answer.
No, I don't think there is a straightforward answer.
Yeah.
Um, I like what they're doing with sustainable fuel. I think it's how they produce enough of it to make it work in the airline industry.
Yeah, but but they're using biofuels, right? So sometimes they're using like cornstarch and stuff like that to put in these sustainable fuels. But then where does the cornstarch come from? Okay, well, it comes from a forest that someone clear cut and then made a corn farm, And it's like, what does more damage, the clearing of a forest to make corn for ethanol fuel, like, which is supposed to be more sustainable, or just keeping the forest and running normal fuel? Like, there's so many trade-offs that we don't understand when it comes to sustainability, and there's so many lobby groups, and there's so much money tied up in all of these decisions that are trying to be made, that it's really hard to fight through the noise and understand what's really harming and what's really hurting. Because you can believe the propaganda from the airline industries that sustainable fuel is the way forward, but then maybe the corn lobby of the United States has a lawyer who's arguing that, we need more cornfields in the United States and we need to clear cut more forests, or shrink the national parks, because we need more arable land or something like that. And it's just like, you just don't know where the trade-off is, and what the actual repercussions to the environment will be. So yeah, again, there's just no easy answer, and the hard part is everyone's just yelling at each other. No one's really talking or having debate or dialogue. No one's really debating respectfully these issues. People are just screaming in the media, "You're wrong, you're wrong, you're killing the earth," or something like that, and that's not always helpful.
Which is where travel, I think, helps, because I think of my life before I travelled. I only knew the town that I grew up in.
Yeah,
Uh, Certainly, my early travel life was more about what my senses um, gained from those overseas trips, because
mm,
you don't learn to talk and articulate till much later. And I think I really benefited from taking those journeys from um, an early age. So definitely feel blessed in that response, and in that period. So
yeah,
the more we can encourage people to get that, the more people will get the problem, and
absolutely.
hopefully. So, about travel itself, clearly you've done a lot of traveling per se. What would you say in our current world is perhaps working all right or not working well enough? And what do you think? What do you think we should be doing better from a traveling perspective?
Um, yeah, I think we should be encouraging travel a lot more, especially in young people. Like, we have all these multi $100 billion people in the world that are just amassed massive amounts of wealth. And I'd always love to see, one of these people set up a foundation to applicants who maybe aren't financially um, stable enough to go and have a gap year. I think the gap year is the greatest thing in the world, because from the age of like 5 to the age of 18, you put your head down and you study. And the worst thing you can do, I think, is then graduate, and then put your head down and study again. Like, I really think everyone needs to put their head up and go see some of the world. And I would love to see some of these. I mean, I wish I had $100 billion. I would set up a foundation to do this, where to basically fund gap years, and to allow, middle and lower income people to not have to put so much stress and not have to take so much debt, um, and to have the chance to give, them 12 months of freedom, to travel around the world and see things. And I absolutely believe that the world would be a better place if the majority of people did that. Because if you go around the world and travel for 12 months, and let's say you stay in 12 countries, one country a month, you're going to come back with such a worldly and such a unique perspective. It's going to change everything you do for the rest of your life. And I think we need those experiences at a young age, and not enough people get them. And then people kind of get trapped in their life and trapped in their ways, and then they're not able to break out, right? Whether you start a family, and then you've got all these expenses, maybe you buy a house, you've got a mortgage, you've got 2 cars, you've got car payments, and then all of a sudden getting away is impossible. But maybe you'll live your life differently if you have that experience at 17 or 18. Maybe you'll vote differently. Maybe you'll read the newspaper with a different set of eyes, or a different understanding of what is real and what is not, and what is propaganda and what is not, and what the powers of be want you to see, and what's really going on. And I think, the more you travel, the more skeptical you become about government. That's for sure, because you really see things on the ground, and you see what is and is not helpful, and you create and build your own perspectives, which are much harder to be replaced by narratives in the media, which are not always working in our best interests. So I think it's really important to create a free thinking society, is to travel and get that different perspective. And it'd be nice to see um, some billionaire someday think that's a priority.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about perspectives.
Yeah.
And the more of those you have, the better. So one interest we definitely share is in podcasting, and I think you seem to enjoy talking to other people as much as I do. Um, do you find that it's endlessly fascinating that different people just bring different sets of ideas, priorities? Perhaps they travel differently. They've looked at a similar problem as you and come up with a different solution. Um, how did your podcasting come about, and has it changed much since you started it?
Well, I love talking to people. I love meeting new people. I love stories. I love storytelling. I think that's been, a key part of what makes me happy for the last, 25 years since I went to China, basically. And and so what happened was I was living in China till about 2018, and then I lived in Dubai for a bit, but I wasn't really living there. I was just kind of like sleeping there for a week, a month, because I was off filming so much, and then COVID hit, and I ended up kind of just hanging out in Dubai because I didn't know where else to go, and I found that really frustrating. And I was trying to like restart my career from Dubai because because there's no one who pays you to make television in Dubai, right? They're all either in the United States or in Europe or in Asia, at least for the English speaking world. So trying to generate work or trying to get things back up and started from that location was really hard. So I decided last year in 2023 that I was going to move to LA, and but I didn't know anyone in LA. I knew a few people here and there, but everyone had kind of relocated because of COVID, and a lot of people were working remotely in other parts of the state or other parts of the country. And I was just like, well, if I'm going to move to LA and I have no friends, and I love talking to people and I love meeting new people and I love telling stories, then I'm going to have a podcast. And I come in with a very interesting resume. I've made 50 hours of TV shows all around the world, and I've been living abroad for 25 years, and now I'm coming back to LA, and I'd love to have a chat. And that is literally my pitch. I write to people on Instagram and on X, Twitter, and on LinkedIn, and all other social media. And then of course your friends of friends start recommending people and stuff like that, and then it just grows. And it's been really rewarding. I only do my podcasts in my studio here in LA, face to face. And the endorphins and the adrenaline and the excitement of just meeting people face to face, not through a screen, shaking people's hands and really building a really strong connection with them, has been just a wonderful experience. And I've done about 100 podcasts now, and I'm eternally grateful to all my incredible guests that have taken time out of their day to chat with me, and really build a connection. And I think it's been a wonderful way to move to a new part of the world. Like I'm from Canada, but it's not necessarily the U.S. I've been to LA like 100 times over the years, but never stayed for more than a week. So to come here now for 10 months, and really meet some wonderful people through the podcast, it's just been great. And I've really enjoyed all the stories, and my podcast is multidisciplinary, like, and it's the subjects are wide open. So I have talks with actors and producers and directors and also other adventurers, but then I talk to people about um, psychiatry, psychology, mental health issues, substance abuse, life after death, professors, China watchers, I just other photographers, and I love it. Every day is just a completely new conversation on a completely different topic. And most of the topics I'm totally ignorant on, and I'm just trying to learn and trying to educate myself, and just to have access to these amazing people and to have them give time out of their day to come and educate me and my audience, um, about a new and exciting topic, or maybe just what's going on in their life, is just really wonderful. And again, to be able to do a podcast, to be unfiltered, to be unedited, and to just speak your mind, is just such a liberating thing. And it's I'm really glad I've done it, and I'm going to continue doing it as long as I humanly can, even when I get back to making television full time, because it's just so enjoyable.
Well, I'm with you with that, but there again, Ryan, I am biased.
Absolutely.
Totally biased.
Yeah.
So, do you think channels like that we're running, because are getting more popular, or people are more interested in what they call long form content?
I think people are just craving authenticity these days. So much of the world we live in is just not authentic. You know, politicians are full of shit. The news media is full of shit. A lot of the stuff we watch and consume is just garbage. Like, you know, people are stuck on social media. People are living their best lives, making other people depressed. Like everything around us is just not great. And I really think that you need a lot of fortitude and a lot of discipline to avoid all the garbage. And then I think that if you crave authenticity, which I think a lot of people do in this era that we're living in, people want to talk to real people. People want to listen to real stories. People want to, you know, talk to people who have really been places and really done things with their lives to find some inspiration that they're not finding elsewhere in society. And I feel like channels like ours will continue to grow and will continue to amass followers and friends because the rest of the world is kind of deteriorating from this space so quickly. And I think this is what people actually want. I mean, people want to listen to people who have done real things. People want to hear authentic people tell authentic stories, and I think it's a great way to educate yourself. You know, if I want to if I want to learn about history, you know, I won't try to watch something on television about history. I'll find a professor who teaches that subject and I'll sit down with them and we'll talk for 2 hours and I'll ask all the questions I want. And that's how you really kind of break through and start building your own knowledge base and start really building your own independent vision of what the world is and what the society is that we're living in.
Mm. Well, I think storytelling has been around as long as we have been around, and I think
Absolutely.
it's one thing we can rely on is the medium of storytelling, and long may it continue.
Let's hope.
Well, it's been an absolute blast talking to you, Ryan. Really appreciate you giving your time generously today, and well, I hope you enjoyed having a chat. You've been on the opposite side of the desk today.
Yes. But thank you very much for inviting me on, and it's an absolute pleasure to be able to talk about, you know, the thing that I love the most and the thing that has changed my life the most, which is just traveling and exploring and adventuring.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's hope we can inspire a lot more people to do the same thing.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you again, and good luck with your future projects coming up for 2025.
And thank you, and good luck with the podcast.
Thanks a lot, Ryan.
Okay. Cheers, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.